Ever try reading those ancient spiritual texts and it feels like they were written for, well, ancient minds?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Today, we're diving into a unique perspective on one of history's most influential figures, Gautam Buddha, through the lens of someone who always seemed to speak our language. Osho. We've got a stack of his talks and commentaries here, and trust me, this isn't your grandma's Buddhism.
What's fascinating about Osho is how he takes these ancient teachings and makes them crackle with a really modern energy. He cuts through the dogma and makes you feel like you're having a conversation with Buddha over a cup of coffee.
Okay, love the coffee analogy, but before we get to Buddha's latte order, let's rewind for a sec. Who was Osho? For anyone just tuning in, paint us a picture.
Imagine a spiritual rebel in the 20th century. Osho challenged almost every convention around spirituality, and he loved digging into figures like Buddha, offering up insights that could be playful one minute and radically profound the next.
All right, so you've got this unconventional teacher tackling an iconic figure. What's the angle here? When Osho talks about Buddha, what's he really trying to illuminate?
Osho wasn't interested in putting Buddha on a pedestal. He wanted to explore the man behind the myth, the seeker who grappled with the very questions we all ask: why are we here? What is this thing called life and suffering all about?
So it's about humanizing Buddha, making him relatable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Osho reminds us that Siddhartha Gautama, that was Buddha's name before all the Enlightenment happened, wasn't born radiating cosmic energy. He lived a life of privilege at first, shielded from the harsher realities of the world.
Until he couldn't ignore them anymore, right? He steps outside the palace walls and bam, reality hits.
Exactly. Osho doesn't just mention the Foresight's old age, sickness, death, and a wandering ascetic. He really paints a picture of how each encounter must have shattered Siddhartha's worldview. Think about it. To grow up in luxury, then suddenly confront the fact that suffering touches everyone. That's a wake-up call on a cosmic scale.
Yeah, no more room for champagne wishes and caviar dreams. So he freaks out, ditches the luxurious life, and goes all in on the ascetic thing. Meditation under trees, denying himself any pleasure, the whole 9 yards. But that wasn't the answer either, was it?
It's fascinating. Osho points out that while Buddha went to those extremes, he eventually rejected both the life of indulgence and the life of severe denial. He found that neither brought lasting peace.
Which leads us to the middle way, right? Not exactly the catchiest term, but I'm guessing Osho found a way to make it relevant.
He did. Osho saw this middle way, not as some bland compromise, but as a radical act of balance. It's about engaging fully with life, not running from pleasure or pain. And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Because it's not about building walls and hiding from the world, but kind of like learning to really, really experience it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where Buddha's famous enlightenment comes in. But for Osho, it wasn't about some kind of,
Like you get struck by lightning and suddenly.
exactly. It wasn't about some mystical event that's out of reach for us regular people.
Right.
Yeah, he saw it as a very practical discovery. The realization that our suffering isn't out there in the world. It's created by the way our minds get sticky and attached to things.
So enlightenment is less about glowing auras and more about mental decluttering, like Marie Kondoing your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, think of it like this. Buddha found that freedom from suffering is an inside job. And the key to that inner transformation, according to Osho, is meditation.
Meditation. Okay. And when he says meditation, he's not talking about chanting in Sanskrit or
Right.
contorting yourself into a pretzel, right?
No, Osho always brought things back to the practical. He saw Buddha as the master of making meditation accessible. He often talked about vipassana meditation, which, if you strip away all the centuries of mystique around it, is really about paying attention to your breath, your body, your thoughts, without getting swept away by them.
Which honestly, that sounds harder than the pretzel thing.
Well, right.
It sounds so simple,
Yeah.
deceptively simple.
That's the beauty of it. You don't need any special equipment or fancy robes or anything. It's about cultivating awareness just right here, right now, in the midst of everyday life. And Osho would argue that in our modern world, with all its distractions and demands, just the buzz and the noise of it all, that's a radical act.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about rebelling against the the tyranny of our own thoughts, our own minds. I like it. But speaking of rebellion, we've got to talk about this whole Buddha as a rebel thing. It's not like the first image that comes to mind when you think about Buddha, right? What did Osho pick up on that maybe most people miss?
Right. It's a great point. And it goes back to Osho always kind of turning those preconceived notions on their head. Back then, religion was everything. It was the law, the culture, the whole deal. And here comes Buddha. saying you don't need a priest or a scripture to connect with the divine to find liberation. He was saying the truth is within you. Go find it.
Hold on, that's fascinating. So are you saying Buddha basically told the priests of his time to, like, take a hike?
Pretty much. And that was revolutionary. He wasn't interested in starting another religion with its own set of rules and rituals. Osho highlights that Buddha's message was always about individual awakening, about empowering people to find their own path to truth.
Wow, talk about shaking things up. I mean, in a world that's like even today, in a world obsessed with telling us what to think and believe, that message feels incredibly relevant, even rebellious today.
Absolutely. And Osho points out that this spirit of questioning, of not blindly accepting things just because, well, that's how it's always been done.
Yeah.
That's essential for anyone on a spiritual path.
So it's less about,
Right.
burning scriptures and more about just questioning everything,
Yeah, yeah.
even our own deeply held beliefs.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to look within, to challenge our own assumptions and biases, and to be open to new ways of seeing the world.
Yeah. So it's about cultivating that inner rebel, that seeker who's not afraid to kind of, I don't know, question the status quo, even the status quo of their own minds. It's almost like Buddha was saying, don't just like take my word for it. Go out and, go on your own adventure, figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, and that's what Osho was inviting us to do as well, right?
Wow.
He's not saying we all need to become, wandering ascetics or meditation masters living in caves. It's about how do we take that same spirit, that same kind of like inquiry, that questioning, and apply it to our own lives, whatever they look like.
Yeah, which, let's be honest, for most of us doesn't involve renouncing all our possessions and heading for the Himalayas, right?
Right.
So how do we apply these big ideas, this blend of inner work and questioning everything to our modern, often chaotic, like day-to-day lives?
Well, Osho was all about finding enlightenment in those
Yeah.
everyday moments, He'd probably say something like, look, you want to be a rebel, start by questioning that voice in your head that says you're not good enough or you'll never understand this spiritual stuff. That's the system, man. That's what Buddha was rebelling against.
So those those limiting beliefs we all have, those doubts, that's the real battlefield in a way.
You could say that, yeah, because once you start to question those deeply ingrained patterns, those assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of, well, that's when things really start to shift. And that's where the meditation comes in, right? Not as some kind of escape, but as a way to actually
To see it.
to examine those thoughts and beliefs.
It's like Buddha's toolkit for like inner liberation is still relevant, even if we're using it to like navigate rush hour traffic instead of,
Yeah.
tiger infested jungles.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Osho reminds us that we all have access to that toolkit. We all have the capacity for awareness, for insight, for finding that place of peace within, no matter what crazy stuff is happening around us in our lives. It's not about, achieving some distant state of perfection. It's about just taking those small, consistent steps towards greater awareness and presence.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
This has been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least. But before we let you go, what would you say are like, I don't know, the biggest takeaways from Osho's perspective on Buddha? If someone's walking away from this going, okay, that was a lot. What do I actually do with this? What would you tell them?
Yeah.
I'd say first and foremost, remember that Buddha, just like us, he was on a journey, right? He didn't, just pop out enlightened. He cultivated that inner freedom over time through practice, through questioning, through, a willingness to look deeply within. And that path, that's available to all of us.
Yeah, it's about the journey, not the destination, right?
Exactly. And that journey begins with a single step. Maybe it's, committing to a daily meditation practice, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Maybe it's questioning a belief that's been holding you back. Maybe it's just approaching your life with a little more curiosity and a little less judgment.
Love it. So to our listener, we say, what will your path to a more awakened life look like? What small step can you take, maybe even today, to connect with that inner rebel, that seeker of truth that's, I believe resides within all of us? It's a question and a journey worth pondering. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.